Hey everyone, welcome to today's video where we're going to discuss the new integration Immuta has just released with Starburst. So as part of this demo video, we're going to walk through what the new integration looks like, as well as show some really cool functionality Immuta has out of the box to help you do more advanced use cases inside your Starburst environment. So looking here at the Starburst UI, I'm logged in as an admin, has access to see everything within a specific environment inside of Starburst. And so you can see I have quite a few things registered here, ranging from Databricks, Redshift, Snowflake, some TCP/H example data that's given from Starburst as part of the environment. And basically what I want to walk through is how Immuta has changed the integration that we have with Starburst. So for those of you who aren't familiar, prior to this release, essentially what would happen is in your catalog listing here, you would have an Immuta catalog or something that you wanted to call it, and you'd basically revoke access from your existing objects in Starburst and force users to go through an Immuta protected catalog. So with this new integration, we've completely removed that requirement. You're still able to use it if it's something that you prefer to use. But what we've been able to do now is we can natively control access and policy directly on the objects inside of Starburst. So let's go ahead and dive into this and see what that means. So today I'm going to walk through an example where we're actually looking at credit card transaction information that span Databricks, Redshift, and Snowflake. And we're going to see how Immuta can protect the data and allow users to see only what they're authorized to see, whether that's they can only see the credit card tables in the specific catalogs in the UI, or they only get masked information back in the data set. And then the last thing we'll talk about is how Immuta can actually let you do a mass join across these different systems. So for example, in this case, we're going to walk through looking at credit card numbers and then say maybe we want to find if this credit card exists in another catalog, or like Databricks and Snowflake have the same credit card number, but we're going to do it in a way that keeps that data masked while allowing you to have referential integrity when you're trying to do some more advanced things like, hey, we have sensitive data, we need to join on it, we don't ever want to expose that to end users. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to the Immuta UI, and the setup I've done here, I'll just briefly show you, is I've actually registered the Starburst integration. We have documentation which will link in the video description, and then I've also protected the tables inside these catalogs within Immuta. And so once I've done that, I'm able to actually go take a look at the data sources we've brought in. So for example, if I search for credit card transaction or just credit card, I can actually go look anytime we found a credit card number. And so the first thing we've done out of the box here is that we scan and auto-classify data for you. We also allow you to use third-party solutions if you want to pull existing catalog tags out of another system to kind of search and see where your information is. So for example, you can see I have a bunch of information ranging the base Databricks tables, the base Redshift tables, but then I also have Starburst specific data. So for example, if I go take a look at this demo credit card transaction table here, you can see in the data dictionary tab, we've actually auto-classified a lot of this data. And so again, you can add your own tags here programmatically, you can pull it from existing systems, but what I want to do is I basically want to walk through and build a policy that says, hey, anytime we find a credit card number, we want to mask it for everyone in the organization. And so the first thing I'm going to do is actually control access to who can see data that contains credit card information. And so inside of Immuta, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go build something called the subscription policy, which I already enabled here. And what I'm saying is that anytime someone has a department of analytics or a department of finance, they should be able to select in Starburst from any table that contains a credit card number. And this is looking at the user level attributes. So we could look at roles here, but this is actually looking that on my individual user profile, my users actually have the department they're in. We're using that at query time to make a decision. So as users change in the organization, this policy won't need to be updated. If they change from the analytics department to say, IT, they lose access to all these credit card tables. And so what does that look like for a user? Well, I'm going to log in as a different user here, and you can see if I look at my cluster explorer on the left side, my user here is only going to be able to see the credit card information that's listed in this data set, as well as they have some additional information because of another subscription policy. So if I looked previously at all of the different Databricks things, you'll be able to see there's a bunch of catalogs. This particular user only is able to access one credit card transaction table there, again, because we have this policy set, but there's also a healthcare policy that's giving them access to some additional catalogs as well. Now this is great because if I was to just go into Immuta and toggle this healthcare data policy, what'll happen automatically is the user is going to lose access in Starburst to anything that they previously had access to, again, because we're controlling this policy decision for Starburst. So whenever I refresh my page here or force the schema to go check again, it's actually going to go check with Immuta to see what that user has access to. So if I switch back as my user who's not an admin here and I refresh their page, you'll see again when it talks to Immuta now, when we expand out like Snowflake, for example, those tables are going to be gone because again, I turned off that subscription policy. So it immediately takes effect, users lose access because again, we turned off a subscription policy here. Now what I want to go ahead and do is let's go ahead and run a query that basically is just going to union together all these different tables. And so this is super useful with Starburst, right? Because you can imagine sometimes you may need to look at data, that spans multiple systems. In this case, I'm hitting all the big cloud providers, and we're going to have a single place where we can start doing some analysis. And so what I want to do now is let's go ahead and run some counts to see how many unique credit cards we have across these platforms. So again, I'm basically taking that union statement I had here, and I'm doing some aggregation on the platform level. So I know like from the Databricks catalog that this can be classified as Databricks, the same thing with Redshift, the same thing with Snowflake. And I'm just casting some of these data types to make sure that they're the same whenever we do the union. And then this top one here, I'm doing the same thing, but I'm just grouping them all together as a total category. So when we look at this, we'll be able to see how the numbers add up as we start turning masking policies on to see how is this impacting the uniqueness of the credit cards. And so now when I run this, you can see the breakdown. So we have 906 total unique credit cards in this data set, and then it breaks them down by platform, right? And so obviously these numbers won't always add up to be, the total here because we're running a distinct, there's likely duplicate credit card numbers in a transactional system where, there's multiple transactions for the same credit card. And so what this basically means is that total, when we run a distinct across all these platforms, there's 906 of them. And then you can see the breakdown by row counts here. I'm just doing a basic count with the group by for the particular platform. And then obviously these three numbers will add up to the 4,991. So now let's go ahead and turn a masking policy on inside of Immuta and see what this does to our data. So if I go back into the Immuta console, we're going to turn on a data policy to mask credit card information. And I'll actually just go create this just so we can see how easy it is. So I'll say mask credit cards. I'll go start building a policy in our UI where I basically want to say mask any column that's classified as credit card using hashing, and we'll say for everyone except when my user is trying to track down a fraudulent transaction. So let's go ahead and say except when my user is acting under a specific reason for fraud detection, and let's say only people in finance should be able to see this. So again, I'm going to look at the user's profile, see if they have an attribute for Department of Finance. And here you can see now we've built our rule, but how do we want this to apply? Well, I'm going to make this dynamic where it says anytime we find a credit card number, this policy should apply. And now what's cool about Immuta is you can see it's actually suggesting that, hey, you have some overlap between some other policies you have in your environment. So when you're building these, it gives you visibility into, hey, you might be doing something that's already been created, or these ones are actually not active, but you might be able to use those. But for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to create this policy that only masks a credit card number. We'll create this, activate the policy, and now this will go into effect. And so we do have a lot of functionality around who can turn on a policy. We actually have something called approve to promote, where you can actually set up approval workflows to allow people to look at the policy, how it's going to impact the data before it actually becomes activated. And so now this policy is active, and what will happen is if I refresh this now, you can go quickly see which tables this policy is applying to. And so again, because we set it to be on any credit card transaction data, this will go out and apply anytime we find that in the organization. So if we switch back into Starburst as my user over here, again, we will go run the raw data query just to see what's happened. So here's before the policy was turned on. Now after we run this query, we'll see the impact on those credit card numbers based on the rules we set. And so again, now we're looking at the credit card numbers, but you can see again, they're all masked across the organization. And now what's cool here is if I go back to my original where I do a union between like Databricks, Snowflake, and Redshift, if I run this query, we'll see how the counts of the credit card information change. And so out of the box, what Immuta is going to do here is we're actually going to use a unique salt with our hashing on these credit card columns across platforms. So if you look at the distinct count here for the credit cards now, you'll notice these actually add up to the three systems. And the reason that is that when we push a masking policy in each of these columns, they're using a different salt. So we would expect that this number would actually be the total of each of these sums here. Because again, each time we find a credit card in Redshift, like if it's credit card number 1, it's going to get the same masked value. But if we go over to Snowflake, it's going to have a completely different masked value, again, because that salt is randomized. Now this is cool, but one of the things we run into a lot in specific organizations is that we need to actually go see what data is being touched. And so what I want to do is I just want to validate how our masking is working. So the first thing I'm going to go over here and do is I've actually ahead of time figured out this specific credit card number. I actually just found the 3 individuals using this credit card and obviously the country codes to help me find this credit card after I mask it. So if I go back into Immuta real quick and actually turn off the masking policy so we can see the raw table, what we'll do is we'll just verify that the masking is working as we expect. So let me go ahead and turn this policy off. And again, because of the new integration with Starburst, it's actually going to talk with Immuta whenever we want to go run a query. So if I go back in here now and I rerun this query, what we'll see is we'll get the unmasked credit card in the projection list here. So I'm basically going to get, I'm basically doing the union, then I'm doing a query against that to filter out for these specific credit card numbers. And so here, it's basically did a union on all those different platforms. And so I'm hard coding the pre-masked credit card number. You can see the credit card number here as well. This is the actual projection being returned. This pre-masked one is something I'm hard coding here just so we have a point of reference as we turn a policy on. So now if I go back again and turn on the masking, let's see what actually happens. So I'm going to turn my masked credit card policy back on. We're going to go back as my user here. And now let's see how the credit card number actually gets hashed. And so again, when I run this query, we're going to get a masking policy applied on that credit card number. This is again unioning together 3 different systems, and I'm basically projecting them here just for ease of understanding. And so now if we look at the pre-masked credit card number, we see it here, and then we can also see what we're doing behind the scenes. And so if you look at each of these, even though we're using the same credit card number, the values are random because again, the way we do our masking by default is to give a random salt for each one of these columns that contain this type of information. But now what do we want to do? Say we have a lot of use cases where you may need to see if something's sensitive, like maybe you have customer's last name encrypted or masked. You may need to join on that, and you never actually want to see who the customer is, but there are use cases, right, where you need to do a join, or you just, like in this case, I want to see if a fraudulent transaction's happening, so I'm scanning all of my systems. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch into this context for something called a project, and in that project, we'll actually tell Immuta, hey, when I'm operating under this specific reason, we should be able to salt the columns that we're masking with the same salt. So that means we'll actually be able to do a join, but we'll still protect the integrity of the data set by allowing people to, one, like do their job, but not actually expose any of this sensitive credit card information. So again, I'm going to go back into Immuta, and you can see here, for example, the policy is always going to apply unless I have someone in finance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into what we call project and build this out. So I built this Starburst fraud detection project, and basically what it says is when you operate under this context, you will only be able to query these 3 tables in Starburst. So the top one here is actually the Databricks catalog, this one is a Redshift catalog, and this one is my Snowflake catalog. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on this mass join option here, and so this will again impact the way we do our hashing with the same salt in this particular context. So you can actually add users to this on a time basis. So if you want them to have access for 30 minutes, you can actually kick them out after that time frame. But what's cool here is if I switch back over to my user in Immuta, they get the option to toggle into their projects. And so let me just log in here because I think my session expired. So again, here we go. I'm going to toggle my project into Starburst fraud detection. And now again, transparently to the end user, the policy is going to apply where we allow the mass join. So this user is never going to have authorization to see that credit card number in the clear because they're not in finance. But what this will do now is when I go back into Starburst, you can see this is before we turned on the salt, using the same salt, using mass joins. If I rerun the query now, what's going to happen is you'll see the same consistent mask value being utilized because again, I'm operating under a specific reason, and Immuta's auditing that, hey, users agreed to this term of we're going to use the data to detect fraud. And now if I just expand this over so you can see, what this means now is that if you need to push a join across Snowflake, Databricks, Redshift, whatever, in Starburst, you'll actually get a match now because again, if you see the hash value we're returning, it's using the same salt. So now referential integrity will work across these different platforms. And so if we actually look here, let me go back to the mass counts. What we would expect is now, because we're using the same salt for the credit card, we should have the same cardinality that we had originally before we did any of the masking, right? Because now credit card number 1 will always get the same hash value regardless of which platform we're looking at. And so when I run this query now to do the union, and then do the aggregate based on the platform, you'll see we get the same consistent 906 distinct credit card numbers. So we just verified that, in fact, we are using the same salt and hash on these credit card numbers now. So if you have to do a join, you can be ensure that it's actually going to work properly while it's still protecting you from seeing sensitive data. And now again, this is the new Starburst integration. So before, this functionality was there as well. We were just making you go through an Immuta catalog and controlling what you could see view-wise inside the Immuta catalog. With the new integration, you don't have to worry about this anymore, because obviously now users are only seeing the data they have access to, whether it's in this project context or through a subscription policy. You don't have to go through an Immuta catalog. You can just hit the base tables and all that information will be protected. I hope you found this demo video useful. Again, check out the description for some links on how to configure the Starburst integration, as well as some additional documentation around Immuta. I hope you have a nice day. Thanks for watching.